so I think we're about ready to get started here.
Okie doke.
So you're just going to introduce yourself, tell us about your early career, high school, when you enlisted, and that kind of thing.
Okay.
Okay?
Now?
Yep.
Okay. Good morning. Gil Maestas. My name's Gil Maestas, Maestas. I was born in Walsenburg, Colorado, southern Colorado. I always refer to that as my little Camelot because I had such a pleasant, wonderful time there. My whole childhood was there all through high school. Born on a ranch, Grandpa's Ranch, east of Walsenburg, sheep ranch, and born into a family of the three eldest people, my mother and two aunts. They were low in education formally, but very high in the education of the world. The remainder from then on, four aunts, one sister, all teachers. So I was born into that kind of an environment. So I had the best of both worlds. And then basically I went to St. Mary's grade school, high school. We lived right across the street from that school, and right across the street from that was the parish house. Right across the street from us was the nuns' convent. I grew up in an environment which was totally, you could call it cloistered, but it wasn't. It was very open. I reflect on that very, very fondly because it affected my entire life. I came from a family where my father wasn't around. No need to go into that, but he wasn't there. And later on, as I look back, it probably was a good thing. My mother was a very, very wonderful lady who trained us all in the concepts of what life's all about, what we should do, and without lecturing, just by example. I had as two male figures, well actually three, my grandfather who died when I was 12. Long story on how the ranch went by the wayside, you don't want to hear that now, but those were the things that influenced me. My influences then educationally were all my aunts, my mother, and then my brother Pete. He's the one who was ahead of me. He was a child with his sister. They were my half-brother and half-sister from my mother's previous marriage. She was widowed. 5 years later, married my father. And along we came. My oldest brother Paul, my sister Eileen, 2 years younger than myself. Pete was older, of course, and up ahead. And basically, as we look back, you know, hindsight's always 100%. My brother Pete was a brilliant man. He was so good in mathematics that he taught some of the nuns, they would call him to tutor them in mathematics at St. Mary's. Somebody listening to me now didn't know that, but now you all know. So these are the influences, along with a priest, Father Raymond Newell, who became positively my idol. He influenced me a great deal. And along the lines of motivation as to what I later went on into, Father Newell, I admired him so much that I wanted to be like him, so much so that I actually enrolled in St. Thomas Seminary, the then St. Thomas Seminary, so that after high school, I would shortly thereafter come on up to be in the seminary. Now, World War II came along, December 7th, 1941, the day of infamy that we all know about. Roosevelt, and I remember vividly coming home and the radio was on in our home, people on the streets talking, and all of a sudden we're at war. And my brother Pete had joined the military. He was raised as I was in Depression years and did almost everything in the world that a person can do to make a living and help the family because we had lost the ranch. And he was off and always would come back on holidays and to visit us, and we all looked forward to it. At any rate, he's in the military. And he wound up being an officer in the Aviation Battalion Engineers, and I'll get to that in a minute. But at any rate, I'm a sophomore in high school, December 7th, 1941, and never thought that the war would ever get to me personally in the sense of myself going there. However, it did continue, and we all know the story, no sense belaboring that. I went on, finished my high school. Now, these little things happen, not so little, they're significant to influence my life. At the time of my high school graduation, which happened to be my birthday, May 25th, 1943, 18 years of age, these things happen. A, I'm going to graduate from high school. B, I'm enrolled in the seminary. C, I happened to be selected to be the valedictorian of our class, so I had prepared a beautiful, you know how we do, and we just present, and I'm all ready to go. Jimmy Friel, dear friend of mine, 6'7", me 5'8" at the time. I'm a little shorter now. Jimmy Friel and I, Mutt and Jeff, were friends, and he would listen to me give my talk, and I just had it down pat. But then the day that I'm graduating, we got notice that my brother Pete had been killed in North Africa, and following Rommel across North Africa. He had the misfortune of, from what we heard, opened the door of a Jeep, and it was mined, and it blew his head off, and that was the story. So you can see all of those factors of the day of my graduation, how it all happened, serendipity or whatever. So right then, as any good American boy, and I am one and was one, we have to rise to the colors. And Father Newell said to me I didn't have to go into the military. I received my draft notice that day also. And I told him, no, Father, if it's meant to be, I'll do it after I come back from the military. I have to go, and I did. And so that affected my entire life, versus clergy into something else. Went on into the military. Like everybody, the stories are common. The day came. This is a memorable event for me that I've said many times. My grandmother was a powerful woman. She influenced everybody. She was very strong, but she had a lot of love, but she was very stern. She walked me to the bus depot when I was drafted, along with everybody else, and then in Spanish, because that's my background. She looks at me and she slaps me and she says, "Como los hombres," which means like a man, and I've never forgotten that. It has carried me through life to this day. And you know, anytime that you're doing something, it influences you, these memories. So I came on in, Fort Logan, drafted, went through what everyone else goes through. In the interest of time, I won't belabor that point. From there, we were sent to basic training in Amarillo, Texas. And there, a series of testings to see what level one was going to be in. And I managed to succeed in what I wanted to eventually wind up flying, and so I made the grade. So from Amarillo, they selected whoever was in the right grades and sent us to Lubbock, Texas, Texas Tech College, to the aviation cadet training program there. And I went through the flight 93. I was in 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98. Those are the 6. I was in 93. And we went on through the different phases and getting ready to go after the academic training that we needed to have to become officers. We were going to go on into actual flying. We took some flying right there at Texas Tech, but then we're going to go into primary and advanced. And the record will show anybody who chooses to go. I imagine it's online. There was a shutdown, a stand down in the production of pilots, co-pilots, that sort of thing. Before they were building up too many. They were all in the officers' club doing whatever one does there, and they didn't need that, but they needed other flying personnel. So we were given the choice of, if we're going to stay in the Air Force and want to fly, to become something else. Well, I tested and I became qualified as a flight engineer, and along with that, gunnery school. So my military occupational specialty, MOS in brief, became engineer gunner. From there, they send us on to Yuma, Arizona for gunnery training along with engineering training. And from there, we were sent to Lincoln, Nebraska to be mobilized into crews. And from there, they sent us to Gowan Field in Boise, Idaho, where the crews were formed. We became families, and we became a family of 10, which crew that I would eventually wind up going overseas with and flying. And that's the sequence of events. Many interesting stories, met many wonderful people, too many incidents to relate, but they were there. And I've documented them in another interview that I gave in a little more detail than I think time will allow now. So there we are. I am now a flyboy. I'm an engineer, and you start out as a buck. So at first, I was an aviation cadet. From there, I went down to Zoom to private, and then up the ranks, and gradually to what I finally became overseas, a tech sergeant. That's 3 up, 2 down, and with the appropriate recognitions in the form of ribbons at the appropriate times, and with no special heroics on any of our parts, unless somebody happened to dignify themselves by some specific act of courage. You know, the different things. We did receive the Air Medal after so many missions, and then every 5 missions we got another Air Medal. I wound up with a total of 4, I believe. Maybe 3, but I think it's 4. So went overseas, didn't fly over like a lot of people. We were taken over on board of a British ship, no, forgive me, a French liner, the SS Columbia. Learned how to speak French because at noon they would say, "Es is exactimo midi," and the dong would go, "Dee." So I knew that that was midday in French, my first French words. Later on, I learned other things. And then as time went on, I learned about my heritage. It is documented that Grandpa and Grandma had French blood in them also, to the extent that it influenced some of my things. And then later on, I find out that my father, his mother, was Italian. So that made him half Italian. So you're looking at a quarter Italian sitting here that I never knew I had until I started meeting Italian people and felt something. The blood speaks, they say, and basically that's the way it was. So this little American boy of Spanish, French, and Italian descent, combination, Duke's mixture, wound up over there to do his thing. We went on the SS Columbia to Naples and transferred from there to a British ship, which took us through the Straits of Italy, Messina Straits, to Bari, B-A-R-I, where we disembarked and bivouacked our way up to our camp. And about a considerable number of miles, camped out, slept on the mud, that sort of thing like you see in the movies. Wound up overseas, 456 Bomb Group, 747th Bomb Squadron, 15th Air Force. Colonel Steed was our commanding officer, so we were the Flying Colts. And I got there, and the very last mission going to Ploesti oil fields was being flown by our group. I did not get in on that, although I think in the past, and if it was misinterpreted, I go back and re-erase that. I personally was not in on that mission, but I knew about it. So with pride, I related it in such a way that it sounds like I was there. I guess in spirit, you know, I was there. Because when they came back, they had corn stalks in the bomb bays. They flew so low to avoid the radar that they had to fly low and then rise up at the right moment, drop their bombs, and peel off and come home. And some of our planes had corn stalks, and I did see that. So that's one little memory. And then from then on were our assignments at the appropriate times to the appropriate missions. In total, I flew 28 times, and they had a system of counting. If the missions were of significant intensity, you'd get credit for, they were sorties, actually, 28 sorties. Time out, one there and back as a sortie. 28 times I did that. If we flew 35 sorties, which were enough intensity, that's what our mission was. If we had enough intense ones, and they counted for 2 missions, if we got to 50 missions, we actually in 25 sorties, you conceivably could have done your tour of duty. I wound up with 28 sorties, which would have come up to about 46 missions. And so therefore, that's how close I got to completing my whole tour of duty. And when time came, the war ended, and fortunately, not a scratch. In the course of that flying, there were many memorable moments. One specific one was a mission December 26, 1944, over Augsburg, Germany. There was intelligence that told those that they tell that this is a time to go get them at the marshalling yards. And a huge number of planes from England, 8th Air Force, in concert with the 15th Air Force from the south, waves would drop peel off, other waves would come peel off to bombard Augsburg marshalling yards. I mention this for two reasons. That mission was so intense. A couple of our engines were knocked out. I was not with my crew. I was flying as an engineer on another crew. They borrowed crew members, and that were peeled off. And at that moment, the red flak comes from down below, the signal to the Me-109s, the German fighters, to go get them. There's some Crips down there, and we peeled off. And just then, out of the skies, guess who comes to surround us? 4 planes, Tuskegee Airmen, these wonderful people. I'm alive now, and all of us were because of these wonderful flyers. They weren't good enough to fly with us because, they were black. And at that time, that's how dumb we were. And we still are kind of that way, but not so much. At any rate, these wonderful people surrounded us, escorted us out of the area to the Adriatic Sea. And so that is a memorable event. It'll always, and years later, after I come back and do what I'm doing now, we find out that a Tuskegee Airman is going to be speaking at the seminary here in Denver, where I almost wound up going, that I told you earlier, and met one of them and hugged him, and he introduced me to the group after his presentation, and I was a frosting on the cake for him because I exemplified what he was talking about, and it was a memorable moment there, post-war. But enough of the war, so much to say, but that one incident is memorable. We did our share of strafing of fields in North Africa, in North Italy, and then other missions to Vienna. I have them all on a map which shows all of the missions we were on. I wish I had it here for a background, but nonetheless, they'll be in our memorabilia back at Regis, where I have all of my things. And this is a wonderful center you have here, by the way. At any rate, so I left, and war ends, come back. And then I decided what I was going to do is go into medicine. And in staccato fashion, came back. War ended while I was in California, getting ready to go be trained as an engineer on a B-29. We were going to be commissioned and become that. I was a tech sergeant on the B-24s. And just then the war ended. Hiroshima, Nagasaki bomb, the catastrophic events that we all know about, and came back to Denver, mobilized, or whatever the word is, from Lowry Field. Then I was exited from the military, given the option of going on and staying on, but I opted not to. Came on, went to Regis College at that time, did my undergraduate studies there, and then from there I went on to St. Louis University, many memorable events not related to the war, but came out. The reason I want to go through it rapidly is because of what happened later. I go out, I'm now trained as a general surgeon. I interned at Fitzsimmons, and then my first year after that was stationed at Lowry Field, 1 year of surgery at Lowry, through Lowry and Fitzsimmons. And then I joined a group of surgeons at Presbyterian Hospital and took 2 more years of surgery, came out as a general surgeon and went into general medicine along with it, and was involved in family practice at the school, accepted on the faculty, and I've been there ever since. Now, as a surgeon at the then Mercy, no longer existent, I'm scrubbing one day, and by then I've learned German. I studied German at Regis and practiced it, so I'm not terribly fluent at it, but enough to get along. And standing next to me is this tall, blonde, blue-eyed, Teutonic image of what Hitler conceived of as a super race. And here I am, 5'8", scrubbing, and I hear this German voice, "Guten Morgen, Herr Doctor." And I said, "Guten Morgen, mein Freund," in German, back and forth. And I looked around, I saw him, and "Was ist seiner Nomen?" What's your name? Walter Greisinger. And we went on talking as we're scrubbing and then in surgery at the appropriate moments because we had to concentrate on what we were doing. this man was stationed in Augsburg, Germany, December 26, 1944, in the Wehrmacht. He was down there as an anti-aircraft gunnery instructor, down there shooting at us up there, dropping bombs on them. And you see what I mean? The coincidence. And here we are years later in surgery working on a human being as fellow doctors. Me doing whatever I could to train him and he listening. We became fast friends. I took him home with his wife Terry, and my wife was listening to this conversation, sitting right over there. We had them to our home. We became fast friends from then and to the present. However, in the intervening time, God love him, he didn't do what he should do. He went through many trainings, wound up in family practice in Pittsburgh, PA, and from there, we occasionally, once or twice, I remember meeting him at meetings, I think in Arizona was one of them, and he had gained a lot of weight. He loved beer. He's German, you know, and he did, and he got, you know how you get, and this went, and one day waiting at an airport to get on a flight, his wife related to us that he had a coronary, died right there. That was our story, the end of Walter Greisinger, but the memory lingers. That's one thing. The point being, wartime, killing each other, now in concert. On another occasion, a memorable event, you wanted me to relate some. We went to Japan for a few days, and a taxi driver was taking us from the hotel to a restaurant. And turns out that he historically was a kamikaze pilot during World War II, Japanese kamikaze. And of course, in my heart, when I heard this, I reeled because of the feeling that we had toward what happened. And, you know, looking back and analyzing history, and as he told us, it isn't the people who fight, it's the governments, the ideologies of the government leaders who lead us, and then we patriotically all get in and fight for our country, as we should. And but he told us so many things on that little trip from there to the actually, he picked us up at the restaurant to take us back to our hotel, and that's where the conversation took place. Turns out that he had a sister who lived in the city of brotherly love, Philadelphia, right? And he told us about her and his feeling for Americans, and he's the one that told me about how the Japanese people really felt in their hearts toward us. And it became a love-in sort of thing when we left his taxi. This kamikaze pilot and this man formerly fighting against them, we hugged. And can you imagine hugging a Japanese kamikaze pilot? And we did. My wife is a witness. She was right there. And so that to me is a human interest story for people to reflect on how things are. So when we're out there killing each other, fighting each other with rancor that we have because of the political aspect, and sometimes we're fighting and don't really understand why. World War II, we had to, yes.
You just mentioned briefly that he described to you the feeling of the Japanese people now towards Americans, or whenever this time period was. What was that feeling?
That they had no personal rancor toward us, that they understood. They basically realized that the desire of their small island country to expand for the improvement of their own status, and they knew that that was the feeling that they had to follow politically, but within their hearts they had no animosity toward us. That's what he said. And true or false, I don't know.
Despite Nagasaki and Hiroshima?
Despite Nagasaki and Hiroshima, they looked at that as the necessary end to what appeared to be an endless conflict. And they were getting tired of it. And many of these people, according to what I heard from him, and I have no reason to doubt it, reflecting, intelligent people will say something had to stop it. A catastrophic event like that occurred, and thank God it did, because there would have been a death along the other fronts, many more. It's horrible, but nonetheless, I merely relate it as a human interest aspect. So that basically is where I wound up in the military, what I did. Wish I had more time to really go into it in detail, because yeah, you should feel it from my heart. I feel this. And that's it. And here I am, and at the other end of my life, looking back, reflecting, and as we all know, hindsight is 100%. I'd like to say 1,000, but that's impossible. It's 100%, and so many things that I wish I could have done different, but I didn't. And here I am, and hopefully somewhere, some little thing I've done or feel will be remembered.
Do you have any reflections upon your military career that you'd like to share with us? Do you think it was worthwhile? Are you proud of what you did?
Very proud of what I did, because the regime that we went over to eliminate was that of Hitler. It was horrible what he was doing with the Jewish people and others, and the pride that I have in my heart for our government for rising to the occasion. As I reflect and learn, I'm not in the inner circle in the government, but we certainly, through the freedom of the press and the things that we learned, some of the things you can be not so proud of, but the overall motivation was good, and the overall end was good. But the war to end our wars, which was World War I, didn't end them. World War II didn't end them, as we well know, and we're currently involved in a conflict which I pray and hope somebody wakes up and says, enough already, let's get home. We've done our thing. We've eliminated Saddam. Now we've opened up a hornet's nest. That's a reflection that I have. Okay.
Are you comfortable with some questions now?
Oh my goodness,
I know there's
yes.
going to be some.
Ask me some. Shoot.
Well, one thing that occurred to me, did you know when the Tuskegee Airmen, those 4 fighter planes, did you recognize them as such, or did you find that out when you landed?
Found out when we landed. Our pilot was a gentleman who's now hopefully in heaven. He's a good man. He's dead now. And he, at the time, we've said, oh my gosh, I've never been so happy to see somebody of that origin. I won't use the expletive in my life. And then the only time that I knew, because, you know, we're out there, I'm a 19-year-old kid, what do I know? I'm up there doing what I had to do, because what I was told to do, and hoping we get through our mission and get back all in one piece, which I did. Oh, in one of the flights, an interesting thing, I was sitting there with my from my upper turret. I'm right at the head of the bomb bay when the bomb bay doors are open and we're over target, ready to drop. The flak going off underneath us. You can see the explosions. Apparently, not apparently, factually, one piece of flak came through the bomb bay, severed my oxygen hose to my mask, and I didn't know it and it just happened, that piece happened to hit me right here, and we had our flak suits on. And underneath, I always carried a wallet which was covered, and in it were the medals that my mother and my beloved auntie had prepared for me to always carry with me. I'm Catholic, and that's my background, and it carried me through. Put them right here next to my heart, and it just happens that that's where the flak hit my flak suit, and it dented it, and I often think to myself, this probably saved me. But the hose was cut, and there I am without oxygen above 10,000 feet. Hypoxia is a very bad thing. I passed out and didn't know it. And when the bombardier says, bombardier oxygen check to the crew, we all have our numbers. I didn't answer. They had the nose turret gunner come up and give me oxygen, and that's why I'm here. Horrible headaches for a long time afterwards. So that's an incident that I remember. I think the piece of flak that our navigator, Al Kuchar, who lives right out in the D.C. area in Virginia, whom we saw just recently, but the World War II memorial opening, we went back there, reunited with him. My wife and I had dinner with him at their home, and beautiful reunion. He showed me a piece of flak that he had saved. I wouldn't be surprised if that wasn't the piece of flak that hit me, because he was right there near where this happened. So basically, those are my reflections and my hope and wishes, and it'll never happen because human nature is made for this, to react and react, and Newton's third law of motion, to every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. There's always going to be wars, I'm afraid.
At what point in your military career were you commissioned? I didn't.
Oh, when I came back, went to medical school, and came as a physician now in the Korean War at Fitzsimmons. I was commissioned as a first lieutenant and went through my first year as a first lieutenant, transferred over to Lowry my second year, where in short order I was promoted to captain, and there I was assigned as a chief medical officer of the outpatient department, and had a lot of experience there in concert, in conjunction with my surgical training. That's when I was commissioned. So I've been everything from a private up to captain, and in the 2 years I was in the Korean War as an officer, I went from first to captain in that period of time.
Were you able to take advantage of the GI Bill?
Oh, yes, I came back, and that, and a lot of hard work and saving, and I'm very proud to tell you that nobody does anything all by themselves. That would be ridiculous to say that. But the GI Bill put me through college, and that the tuition and the stipend that we got, and then for the first year of medical school, big influence. And then that, along with working hard, I've done almost everything there is to do to make money, from washing floors to janitorial work to cleaning toilets to pumping gas to painting houses. I can give you a long history of events like that, and salted away the money so I could pay for my books, for my tuition. I was married. My brother-in-law is sitting listening to this conversation. His sister, I married her when I was still in college, and we had 3 little girls. Unfortunately, God took her when I was at Lowry Field in 1954. And just a month and a half after our little baby was born. So I was widowed at that point, had 3 children. It altered my whole career in the sense that I went into general surgery instead of cardiovascular surgery, which is what I had anticipated, but that was too long. And I had to keep my kids all together. And at any rate, 7 years later into my life, well, prior to that, I met a young lady who, at the age of 16, looked at her, didn't think much. 2 years later, that young 16-year-old girl had blossomed into a flower that, holy mackerel, I never thought there was a more beautiful flower in the world. My jaw dropped open. Tell everybody, by then I was still young and full of life, and I had at least 50 girlfriends, and I'm bragging now. And I had to shed all of them, because once I saw her at 18, that was it. And by gum, to this day, 45 years now we've been married, and she's sitting listening to this along with my brother-in-law. And so you see how close the relationship is. And we, the 2 of us, had 3 children. Our first little girl, unfortunately, she's in heaven. We named her our little angel, in Spanish, Angelita. And then along comes our son, Gobi, Gilbert, his nickname Gobi, and our son, Steve, who are now 40 and 41, or 41 or 40. I have to look back, somewhere in that range. And they've made us grandparents, and through the girls, great-grandparents. So we're really enjoying life.
Dr. Gil, that was a marvelous, marvelous interview.
I'm going to follow up on
Any
a
other
couple of things here, because I've got a few things that we'll go back over some. You talked about when you came back to Regis, you had a roommate when you came back to Regis. You had a little different perspective on life than he did, didn't you?
Oh, yes. Want me to talk about that?
Describe a little bit about
Real
that.
rapidly. I won't tell you his name because he might be listening and I don't want to embarrass him. But he was out of high school at Regis, freshman, and I had to live on campus. I didn't know where else to live, so I did, and he assigned me a roommate. And I am 20 years old, almost 21. by now I've been overseas, I've seen what I've done, all these experiences, and you come out quite mature. Here I am with this kid whose whole idea of college was party, girls, etc. Nothing wrong with partying girls, but there's lots wrong if it interferes with what you're about. And I was bound and determined I was going to go get my bachelor's degree along with what I had at Texas Tech, and I wanted to study. And that's what my goal was, because otherwise you don't carry these heavy loads. And I became so positively disturbed in myself. He wanted, it was nuisance talk from him. We were two opposite ends of the pole. So I asked the rector there, please to move me, and they didn't have room because they were all full. So I went to live with my sister. I left the campus and I went to live with my sister and went on the then trolley cars that used to run from downtown up there to Regis. It was there. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, and I'm just going to ask you a little bit about. We were talking before. You trained on B-17s and you flew your missions on B-24s, and kind of describe a little bit between the differences between those planes and what was unique about the B-24.
Well, first the B-17 was known as a flying fortress, which later, in comparison with others, B-29 and later the Hughes Giants, it was like a little B. But Fortress was a big, wide wing and carried same bomb load as the 24. The 24 had the Davis wing, which was an innovation in aerodynamics. People thought it would never fly, but if you study it, it did. And didn't go quite as high as the B-17. The upper turret in the 17, the upper turret gunner stood. The B-24, I loved it because it had seat. You get up there, pull up the seat, and you're sitting there with your 250 caliber machine guns right by your side with all the equipment here. And you're up there and rotating around seeing the world. Much better than being in the ball turret looking down, and much better than in the tail, all isolated, all of which were occupied. Those basically were the differences. They bragged about it. They flew mostly with the 8th Air Force out of England, B-24s out of 15th Air Force in Italy. The Billy Mitchell, the B-25, the same concept as the 24, but it was 2-engine, same wing concept. Anything else?
It's just, when you were on a mission as a flight engineer, what were your duties?
The duties of the flight engineer were the same as the engineers on the floor, on the ground, but the ground engineers were total charge of dismantling the engines, giving them their checkups, replacing parts. We became acquainted with all of that. Obviously in the air we're not going to dismantle anything, but if something went wrong, we had to know all of the trouble signs and be able to react to emergency situations with the engines, with all of the equipment on the plane. And those were basic duties. Plus the engineer, flight engineer was the chief of the enlisted crew, as the pilot was the chief of the total crew. Does that answer your question?
We've talked with a lot of guys, especially the guys that flew out of England. They talked about a lot of fighter attacks. In Southern Europe, were there as many fighters, and was the resistance as heavy as what you might have heard about from some of the other guys?
No, the resistance when I was there by fighters wasn't that great. It was there sporadically, as I mentioned, the one in Augsburg, but the vast majority of the time our difficulties were with a flak coming from down below. Isolated attacks by fighters. The people in England certainly had a heavier load because they were constantly being the Stuka dive bombers and the fighter planes and the Me-109s down south. Years later, I found out that all these people flying the Me-109s were young kids, even younger than we were. We were all kids up there just fighting the battle, kind of like when we were kids and played war, shooting each other and playing dead. We were up there for real, but not much older than the kids playing in the backlots. That answer your question?
Yeah. The other story, and I know John probably doesn't know about this, is you were not a drinker at this
Oh,
time.
yeah.
Can you
um,
describe that
yes.
story?
Well, the only drinking I had done was the wine after Mass when Father would say, drink it, and we could drink it, and we all looked forward to that. But that was the only drinking history I had. We get overseas, first mission, come back, and there's a table lined up, a long table, the medical officer and the corpsman standing there with these different bottles of whiskey, double shots poured out, sitting there. And it was protocol and it was mandatory because some psychologists had figured out that after a mission, they assumed all of us were going to be nervous wrecks. Well, some of us were, some of us weren't, and some of us were too dumb like me to be nervous. We were over there gung-ho, and my brother got killed in North Africa, and that fire just carried us through. Mission, we get rid of our equipment, and we're ready to go to have dinner. And the way out, airman, drink. And, sir, I don't drink. Drink. So, dutifully, I took it, and the big boys was going glunk and down. Well, so no, you don't just sip it, you got to go glunk. And I went glunk and took it, and oh, gee, that felt warm. And I walked out, and a few steps out of the quarters, the Quonset hut where we were doing that, on our way back to our tents, our quarters before we go to dinner, I saw stars, I got dizzy, I sank to the floor, and Ross Campbell, the nose turret gunner, who happened to be from Gardner, Colorado, which is right by Walsenburg, he was on the crew, same crew as me. We comforted each other, remembering back home. And he carried me to the tent. I went to bed, didn't have dinner that night. Yeah. Oh, what a memory. Thank you for reminding me of anything. Remind me of more stuff.
Oh, I'm trying to think right now. I'm trying to go back over because it's. I know we've had, just what was it? I had something in my mind. Things go in and out of my mind every 10 seconds, and then I don't remember what they are.
Well, I wish I could think. There were so many things, but the time wouldn't permit.
Gil, that was such a wonderful, wonderful interview. I don't know that it needs much more. A guy could go on forever about little things that happen.
Oh, I could sit here all day.
That's
going to be just marvelous on TV.
Mm-hmm.
It really is. We sure do. We thank you so much for giving us your time.
Monsieur, mon plaisir. My pleasure.
Merci beaucoup.
Très bien.
Très bien. Très bien.
Pas de
Mon
quoi.
ami. Très bien.
Okay.
There's anything else that you can think of at this point, because I'm going back over. Because we talked about a lot of things in general, but we're going to be cutting this down into about a 20-minute segment, probably.
Mm-hmm. You going to give me a copy of this?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, sure.
Great. Mrs. Maestas, pump me a little bit.
I think you hit all the high points.
Okay. That's what I thought.
Fleo, anything that I've ever told you that you can remember?
Well, no, except on most of those missions, they were bombing runs over Germany, over different places.
Northern Italy, Austria, Hungary, I told you, and Germany. That was it.
Missions were mostly bombing runs.
Yeah, we were bombers.
You said sorties and missions, but you didn't detail out the bombs, the bombing runs.
All of those. Sorties is merely a term saying from a takeoff to landing there and back is a sortie. If this sortie was bad enough to where they were really hitting you and you went through a lot, you would get credit for 2 missions. So therefore, a mission, by that definition, was a sortie. A mission could be a sortie, or a sortie could be 2 missions, depending on the intensity. Oh, always. That's what we were there for. Yeah. And along with that, if somebody attacked us,
I'm going to get back into one point here. We'll get you kind of turned back over towards John here. You talked about on the raid to the Tuskegee Airmen. Didn't you ditch in the Adriatic?
Oh, yeah, well, they escorted us to the Adriatic Sea. The plane was crippled. Obvious it wasn't going to make it. And by prearrangement, this is all prearranged. If you're not going to make it, you're going to have to lose a plane. Let's try to make it over water so you don't crash and die. And so over the Adriatic Sea, somewhere south of Venice, what is it over in Yugoslavia? Anyway, in that area, the northern tip of the Adriatic Sea, there's an island there, and if you can make it, and we did, you go to the appropriate level, altitude, and then the plane attitude is changed so that it's diving into the water, and at the proper altitude, bail out, open your parachute. Yes, I forgot to tell you that. And an experience so long ago I can't hardly remember it, but it's quite an experience. And you land, and there's a boat right down there, digs you out of the water. You release your parachute at the proper altitude if you're conscious, and we were. All of us made it. They picked us out, took us to the island, checked us out, put us on a plane, shot us right back over to our base, which is right across the water there. It was all so...
Where did the Tuskegee Airmen go?
The Tuskegee Airmen they would escort us safety, then they'd go on about their business. There's one story about them that might be interesting here, and he related it to us at the talk at the seminary that I referred to earlier. They flew, they never lost a plane, by the way. They would always were successful. Historically, that's true. They weren't bragging. On this one mission, that they landed, the plane landed where it was going, but they weren't allowed to land there. They had to go where the black men have to land, the Tuskegee Airmen, and they flew, landed, and then they were taken by truck miles away to wherever they could be interviewed. They couldn't even come to the same place as we could. And they were treated terrible. Eleanor Roosevelt, God love her, she was instrumental in changing all of that. But not before they went through the indignities that they did. And if you could see these men, they're beautiful specimens of humanity, college graduates, and man for man, I wish a lot of us are like that, but I wish more of us were that way and could just see them for what they are. I have so much pride in them. If they ever hear me talk, I'm just patting them on the back. Like I told you, I hugged that one guy. He was so tall, my nose was in his belly button. And he bent over like this, and then and here we're looking at them as inferiors. Can you believe that? Does that answer your question?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You don't get short answers from me, do you?
No, but we get good answers.
Put it there.
Dr. Gill, that was just marvelous.
God love
We
you.
thank you so much for going.